Locations: battlefield. The sight was not much to behold, even on a sunny day, yet it was here that several years earlier a bloody battle had ended in a magical cataclysm. Rocky gullies opened onto a plain scarred with furrows and craters dug by trebuchet missiles, and magical explosions detonated by the sorceress Sabrina Glavisic. Tall reddish grass covered part of the flatland, the rustling armor and bleached bones of the fallen nestled among it. Once the curse was activated, however, a ghastly mist engulfed a section of the battlefield. Within it stretched a world seemingly pulled from a nightmare, a world in which ghosts of the fallen endlessly reenacted the battle that had claimed their lives. Vergen. This town in the north of Aden was founded by dwarves who established the mines in the surrounding hills. As was their custom, they carved their homes as public edifices directly into rock formations, granting Vergen a unique architectural style. The town was an important trade center, one of the roads through it leading into the country's interior. Humans had also attempted to settle in the area, but the disturbances that plagued the Pontar Valley left most of their villages burned and in ruins. Nevertheless, when we arrived in Vergen, it was teeming with humans in addition to its mainly dwarven population. Saskia's peasant rebels and a group of the Adernian nobles had made camp there and promptly begun to measure each other with menacing glares. Meanwhile, all the groups that had assembled in the area were mistrustful of Iorveth's Scoia'tael, who strove to keep to themselves with unmistakably elven aloofness. Truly, if not for Henselt's army making camp nearby, the whole rabble would have been at each other's throats in no time. Characters: Cedric. Heroism sometimes exacts the highest price. When Triss' life was in danger, the elf did not hesitate to defend her and was wounded, mortally as it turned out. Thus Cedric died, though his sacrifice was not in vain. Margot. It turned out that Margot was a spy for Iorveth. She decided to use that connection to avenge her lover's death. Derae. The elven girl at the brothel in Flotsam was a favourite of many clients and of Margot herself. Unfortunately, she was bestially murdered by the blood-drunk mob during the massacre. Ele'yas. Scoia'tael units are made up chiefly of young, rash elves who need not think twice before they take up arms in the fight for non-human freedom. Ele'yas was one such elf, and was considered one of the best warriors in Iorveth's unit to boot. Cecil Burdon. When we arrived in Vergen, we learned that the town's elder was named Cecil Burdon. This former dwarven miner was typical of his kin, realistic, substantive, and possessed of a sober outlook. Vergen needed an administrator like that, so Burdon was, beyond all doubt, the right dwarf in the right place. Skalen Burdon. Cecil's nephew, the young Skalen Burdon, had been taken in by the older man after the lad's parents perished in one of the non-human massacres that occurred in Eden. As friendly, hard-working, and efficient as his uncle, Skalen took it upon himself to act as Vergen's official representative in his uncle's absence, providing all newcomers to the town with any information or assistance they needed. Kalten. Revolutions breed monsters, and Kalten was one beyond all doubt. Embodying the most primitive peasant desires, frustrations, and fears, he was not bound by moral chains. Such people can commit acts most foul, and the list of this once simple farmers' atrocities was long indeed. Felicia Cori. Young sorceresses from the school of Arethusa must, apart from passing exams, complete an internship under a mistress's watchful eyes. As part of such an internship, the young Felicia Cori peddled magical curios of her own production in Vergen. Mael. If speech is silver but silence is golden, then Mael must have been sufficiently rich to do something more interesting than run a shop. Nevertheless, the silent elf had some really interesting goods to offer. Earso, or Earso, never mind. Shit, stench, and rats are inherently elements of every larger population centre. Unable to dispose of the first two, the authorities of Vergen were trying to deal with the latter. Earso was a rat catcher they had hired, but it was worth noting that some of the traps he was selling were large enough to catch a wolf. A highly talented individual, the man known as Earso had dabbled in many professions. From his times as a rat-catcher in Vergen, he still had a wide selection of traps among his wares. They were, in his words, for rodents, among others. Triss Merigold. I am restricting myself here to the events that I know were kind of after the end of Act 1. Triss was kidnapped by Letho. Geralt and I feared what he might do to her. Believe me, it was eating me alive, making rest impossible. Searching Sheila's quarters and talking to her neighbour brought more questions than answers. It appeared that Triss had known the woman she had talked to, but the fragments of the conversation recounted to us remained mysterious. Triss had reached Aden. There was evidence to prove it. Finding her would prove difficult, however. Dandelion. Obviously, when Geralt decided to continue his search in Vergen, located in the borderland soon to be engulfed by the flames of war, I chose to accompany him. For the Witcher could at times be naive as a child and knew as much about politics as a ghoul knows about cooking. Thus the chances were slim to none that, bereft of my help, he would manage to find new leads without getting embroiled in some trouble along the way. As his friend, I clearly could not allow that. Vernon Roche. To put it mildly, Roche was irritated with Geralt's decision, and his trust in the Witcher did not grow. Because of his contacts with the Scoia'tael, Geralt lost the chance to work with Vernon Roche. Their ways parted. Kingslayer. In the ruins of the Elven Bath, Geralt and the mysterious assassin stood eye to eye a second time. Geralt was surprised by what he learned. Letho of Gallet had been a Witcher. What is more, there were other Kingslayers, and they and Letho had worked out together to assassinate the 2 dead northern monarchs. The Witcher and the assassin were also no strangers. In fact, Geralt had once saved Letho's life. Their discussion ended abruptly as arrows whistled through the air and swords clashed. Letho demonstrated his strength and skill by beating Geralt black and blue. Before leaving, he announced that he was on his way to Aden. The Kingslayer proved true to his word and kidnapped Triss, wounding Cedric mortally in the process. He forced the sorcerers to aid him by teleporting them both to Aden. Iorveth. The elf was certainly a dangerous individual. He was not, however, a bloodthirsty monster. Ever cautious and aware of the game he was playing, he jumped at the chance of testing Letho's loyalty, becoming Geralt's ally, at least temporarily. Fighting side by side certainly helps dispel distrust. The Witcher kept his word, which Iorveth appreciated, and the path to further cooperation stood open. The Scoia'tael leader had a vision, and his pursuit of it put him in an altogether different light. Grand as it was, the plan could either be considered incredibly ambitious or purely insane. Whatever the case, he needed allies, though if he found none, he was more than prepared to forge ahead alone. Iorveth was loyal towards those who had placed their trust in him, and he returned their trust. This was undeniable. His respect for Geralt grew after they freed the prisoners, and the elf would not hesitate to repay the debt he had incurred. I can't talk. When Iorveth chose to fight for a free Pontar Valley, when he swore an oath of allegiance to Saskia, he stood alongside the humans defending Vergen. Few trusted his sudden shift in this uncompromising enemy of the Dwan, an elf responsible for more than one razed village and the tears of more than one mother over a slain son. The Squirrel Commander had Saskia's full confidence, however, and that put an end to all discussion. The relations between Vernon Roche and Iorveth were certainly complicated. The Scoia'tael openly hated the Blue Stripes commander and doubtlessly wanted their death, yet one could see in him a shadow of respect for the Temerian's abilities and tenacity. The fact that the elf could give even a hated enemy his due was, I think, to his credit. Zoltan Chivay. It was not surprising, really, that having encountered the aforementioned human spite and ungratefulness at every step, Zoltan sympathized with the dwarven and elven freedom fighters. He was balanced in his views, however, and valued loyalty to old friends above all else. Zoltan went with us to Vergen, and with enthusiasm worthy of his military past, began training the local militia. We would soon see his baptism of fire. Though it appeared they would have a hard time, Zoltan was ready to defend the cause he believed in, fighting at the side of elves and men. Bernard Loredo. This vile individual's duplicity, his fidelity to his purse alone, were apparent to anyone who paused to look at him. His sailor flotsam, an important trading post to the kingdom of Cedwan, was to be his crowning swindle, and the provincial ruffian cared little that it would also render him a traitor to his country. John Natalis. It seems that every other person you meet took part in the last war against Nilfgaard. Such are the times in which we live. Yet we best remember those who made their mark in the annals of that conflict. John Natalis, Constable of Temeria, is one such person. Supreme Commander of the cumulative forces of the North and the Battle of Brenna, Natalis fought valiantly, commanded wisely, and contributed vastly to the victory, despite being outnumbered by the enemy 2-1. And he did not rest on his laurels after the battle. Instead, he pursued the foe, routing him nec nuncius cladis, or nearly so, leaving but a few stragglers to flee beyond the Yeruga. John Natalis was honoured richly for his deeds, and the square in Vizima now bears his name. After Fortis' death, Natalis temporarily served as regent of Temeria. Síle de Tansarville. It appears Síle had very specific plans concerning the king Henselt of Cedwan and his attempts to father an heir. From what we've been able to tell, the meddling of Síle and another sorceress in the world of politics was further reaching than anyone had imagined. Serrit. Sometimes a person's name sinks into memory and brings fear to one's heart at its first mention. Who was the mysterious Serrit? What goals drove him, and what role would he play? Geralt had yet to learn all of this. Auckes. When he first heard Auckes' name, the Witcher had no idea who this was. Ha! He did not have the slightest inkling of the role this individual would play in our story. Henselt. The aging Henselt did not have a living heir, and the rumour was that he had found producing another son somewhat troublesome. Henselt's virility may have lessened with age, but his ambition certainly had not. The king wanted to wage a war and reclaim Lormark, a province he had already given up once, no matter the cost. Philippa Eilhart. This was hardly the first time Geralt and I encountered Philippa Eilhart, jewel of the court at Tretogor, and once the trusted sorceress of King Visimir II. Philippa was one of the most talented mages of those times. Only a handful ever mastered the art of polymorphy. Her intellect and the influence she held at the Polydanian court were not to be underestimated. Proud, independent, and extremely beautiful, as graceful in a fanciful yet elegant dresses in a man's travelling outfit, she was beyond any doubt one of the most attractive women I have ever known. Yet I would not count Philippa among the most pleasant of females, despite her indisputable though chilly charm. Her gaze alone was enough to make the most confident men shudder, and the mere thought of spending a night with her would make their flesh creep. At the time, Philippa Eilhart was staying in the town of Vergen as a part of Saskia, the Dragonslayer's inner circle. Her motives remained unclear, to say the least. The former court magician had never been known for her altruism. However, one cannot deny that without her help, Geralt would not have found his way through the magical mist. Philippa rendered him an invaluable service at the time. Her qualifications in the area of curses, magic, and supernatural phenomena were undeniable. If there was anyone to help the Witcher in this regard back then, it was certainly Miss Eilhart. Still, I was extremely glad that it was Geralt, and not I, who was forced to speak with the Tretogor magician. It was Philippa who gave the Witcher the list of the ingredients for the antidote for the poison plaguing Saskia. The knowledge of recipes, ingredients, and their specific properties is always extremely helpful in learning magical arcana, and few could equal Eilhart in that regard. Dandelion, who is the narrator of the journal, doesn't like Philippa because they run into each other. They have history together. I'm not the pleasant kind either. Saskia. Nothing drives a revolt forward like the right leader, especially one who is a young girl known for performing miraculous feats of valor on the battlefield. From Joan of the Arc coast to the infamous Falca, history is full of women who led fanatically devoted hosts to victory. Interestingly, all those heroines were not only charismatic but also extremely beautiful. The squint-eyed, gap-toothed, and pock-marked generally have trouble rousing the masses. Saskia, whom men would follow into fire, was no exception. She was a smooth-skinned lass with blonde hair, dark brows, large eyes, and shapely lips. Her full breasts perfectly complemented her rounded hips. In other words, she was the ideal icon for a rebellion. For, dear reader, if a man in battle receives the appropriate motivation in the form of a lovely female ass, he is likely to achieve miracles in its wake. When there is no such ass to lead the way, the freedom fighter's thoughts quickly turn to harvest time, his own woman, and half a pint of booze at the inn. News had already reached us of the heroic Saskia, the woman who held Kedwen's armies at bay. At the time, however, it all seemed like little more than exaggerated rumours. As with any true hero, there were many incredible tales about Saskia. Some claimed she was invulnerable to fire and had thus survived the terrible battle when Sabrina had rained the very flames of hell down upon the combatants. The girl was also famous for killing a dragon. One would be hard-pressed to find a better material for a local hero. Word of Saskia's deeds had travelled far beyond Eden's borders. She was a heroine in the eyes of many. What surprised me most was that she had made an impression on Iorveth, who had high hopes for her. Prince Stennis. After King Demavend's death, Prince Stennis became heir to the Jordanian throne, at least in name. However, pride and a chilly disposition rarely win the love of one's subjects, and that was very much Stennis's problem. His youth did not strengthen his claim either. Though no one openly questioned the prince's claim to the crown, Stennis did not have enough support to actually have it placed upon his head. Given the situation, sitting out important events would have been political suicide. The war for the Pontar Valley gave him the ideal chance to bolster his position by demonstrating what a good ruler he would make. History has shown time and time again that when a realm is in chaos, deeds rather than words grant one legitimacy in the eyes of one's subjects. Stennis greatly desired to prove himself the equal or superior of the Vergen of Eden. He had strong support from the nobility, yet the common folk had few reasons to sympathize with him. Dethmold. Apart from a few chance encounters at official banquets, Geralt had the occasion to meet and speak more extensively with the sorcerer on Thanet Island during the bloody coup when all manner of mages jumped at each other's throats, and the council and conclave ceased to exist. Dethmold and his brother Drithelm, both in the service of King Estrad of Kovir at the time, attempted to remain neutral as events unfolded. To no avail, however, as those who had allied themselves with Nilfgaard thought nothing of the impartiality of others, and many mages simply perished, brought down in fanciful ways by their colleagues' spells or pierced by the arrows of the Scoia'tael summoned to the island by the plotters. Drithelm met just such a fate, while Dethmold saved himself by fleeing. Dethmold then filled the opening for a sorcerer advisor at the court of King Henselt of Kedwen, and proceeded to place all of his abilities at the monarch's disposal. Yarpen Zigrin. Our friendship with Yarpen Zigrin stretches back a long time. It began during the famed hunt for the golden dragon, which not only was not caught, but also bared up its hunters. Those events were later described in one of my ballads, and anyone interested in the story should read it. Zigrin, like most of his kin, is characterized not only by his love of gold, but also by his bawdy sense of humor, sober outlook, pragmatism, and loyalty to his friends. Geralt mentioned that he later met Yarpen and his lads in His Majesty's secret service, the Majesty in question being Henselt of Kedwen, for whom they were escorting a secret cargo. Though their own situation was not cheerful at all, they nevertheless aided the Witcher, easily proving that a dwarf won't abandon a friend in need. I'm not going to say anything about that story, as it's in the book, both the Golden Dragon and the Yarpen Zigrin, and what happens with the convoy and what is up with that convoy. It's an interesting enough story. It's in Sapkowski's book, and I'm not saying a word about those. Glossary. Other. Wild Hunt. According to the Nordlings, the Wild Hunt is a procession, or rather a cavalcade of skeletal horsemen. They rush across the sky on the bony remains of steeds. Clad in rusty remnants of armor, they wear jagged swords at their waists. Like comets, the Wild Hunt is an omen of war which has been confirmed beyond all doubt. The spectral cavalcade ventures in search of victims every several years, but its harvest was never as rich as just before the last war with Nilfgaard, when over 20 souls went missing in Novigrad alone after the hunt passed through. Curiously, elven and dwarven legends make not the slightest mention of the Wild Hunt.